Hey guys, in today's video, I'm going to give you a bit of a summary, at least some of the most important lessons out of this book right here, which is called Never Split the Difference. And this book is one of the best negotiating and persuasion books that has ever been written. And I say that with confidence because the guy who wrote it, Voss, he was like a lead negotiator in the FBI. He dealt with serious life and death situations where he needed to negotiate hostage releases from either like gang leaders, terrorists, bank robberies, and he dealt with it all. And honestly, reading the start of the book here, it's very obvious this guy knows exactly what he was talking about. Even when he was in like sort of negotiating school, he was like top of the class. He had a natural ability for it. And he's taken things and like added learning lessons on over time and basically put his whole story and all the interesting things that have happened to him and the techniques he's used in this book right here. I'm not going to go through the book because honestly, the book is too interesting filled with stories and everything. I'm just going to tell you some of the main learning lessons I took from it. So lesson number one is make sure you mirror the person who you're speaking to quickly build up rapport. You might be wondering, like, what does mirroring mean? Well, mirroring means is to copy the characteristics and the personality traits of the person you're speaking to. So for instance, if I'm sat here delivering, this video right now, I've got one leg on top of the other, I've got, maybe I've got my hand on my chin like this. I'm speaking at a very specific, slow tone of voice. The pace isn't fast at all. And I'm just speaking with you with direct eye contact. If you were going to mirror me, you would literally do exactly the same back to me. And what this does is it quickly builds up rapport with people. And the reason why it quickly builds up rapport with people is because people essentially try to associate with people who are very much like them. They feel almost a bond with people who are very much like them. If you look throughout your life, looking like office environments, work environments, or even down to like high school as well, you'll notice that people of the similar groups, similar sort of characteristics, they all tend to stick together. And the reason why is just very similar to each other. It's just very simple like that. So what a good way to actually shortcut this is to pretend you are similar to the other person. So Chris would usually actually speak on the phone with people. As far as I'm aware, like it's actually quite rare for a hostage negotiator to speak, face to face with someone. But when he would speak on the phone with someone, he would mimic their exact tone of voice. He would speak at the exact same speed they would speak. He would use their exact language and say the same words that they were pretty much saying back to them, right? So they would say, I'm really not happy with this situation. And he'd be like, not happy with this situation? Same words back to them. And what this does is it creates an understanding and builds up a deep rapport, like strategically builds up a deep level of rapport. And a lot of other great books mention this. I'm actually reading one of Tony Robbins' books at the moment, and he also talks about like a quick way to build up rapport is to mirror the people on the other end of like the phone, or if you're in like a meeting or something, you want to build up rapport with someone, mirror them. So that's lesson number one. Think about like what type of people who are in your life, who are maybe like your potential connections that you want to meet, who you can actually want to build a deep level of rapport with. Think about how you can use the mirroring principle in that situation as well. Lesson number two, it's not what you say, it's how you say it. So occasionally, Chris will be in a negotiating situation where maybe the person was like erratic or very angry or, a bit irrational, or maybe they hated the previous person they'd spoken to, the previous negotiator. So what he did was he would go into the call with like a downward inflection with his voice. So what this essentially means is if you're my boss right now, let's just say I'm your employee, you're my boss, and you were to say to me, Rob, how's everything going? And I was like, everything's under control. Or I was like, everything's under control. Or I was like, everything is under control. Which one sounds more confident? It's the last one. And Chris actually coined this the late night DJ voice. And what it does is it conveys confidence to the other party. It conveys that you know exactly what you're talking about. Certainty. Sometimes it's a little bit playful, and it's very, very hard to be irrational with a person who's speaking in a low and controlled voice. And the reason why is just because it sounds like this person knows exactly what they're talking about. And if a person's very sure of themselves, like, the psychology of this is we're less likely to question them. Lesson number 3, and this is another great lesson to deepen rapport. When a person is speaking to you and talking to you, whether it's on a sales call, whether it's in a sales meeting, a great way to make them feel understood and to kind of get them on your side is to sit there and listen to what they say. And once they've finished and stopped talking, is to then repeat back and summarize everything they have just said to you. And if you can do this in a way where it gets them to say, that's right, like you've understood them, then you're on the right path. This deepens rapport. It creates that connection where people feel they are truly being understood. And if you're entering a negotiation, whether it's a sales meeting, whether you need to get a new contract, whether you're trying to understand your employer's like brief that they've just given to you, if you just repeat back to them, A, B, you said about C as well, is that right? That's right. Then they'll feel understood. They'll feel like you also know what you're talking about. This is another great technique to get them on your side. And what happens is, once you have a person on your side and you're building up that rapport, then you can start making the turn to actually talking about the demands, to actually talking about what you want, whether it's like freeing a hostage. I hope none of you are watching this who are, thinking about freeing a hostage somewhere, just from my amateur advice here that I found in a book. So, but you get the idea, right? Like if you're entering like a negotiation, if you're entering a work meeting, this is a great way to do it, right? Like this. Lesson number 4, if you're speaking to someone and you really cannot get anything out of them, occasionally you'll speak with someone over the phone and it's one word answers, yes, I'm okay, sure. What you have to do in situations like this to get them to open up so you can actually have that as the gateway to building rapport is to actually say to them something which is going to trigger a no out of them. So for instance, Chris uses a great example in this book. If you're working with someone, whether like a colleague or, you're in a business or something like that, you're working with someone and like it's so hard to get communication out of them, trigger the no out of them. And this is a great way to do it, is you send them an email just simply saying, have you given up on this project? People have a tendency to defend their position. And if it's a negative answer they've got to give, they've then got to justify it as well. So it like completely gets them to open up and talking. And suddenly you'll get an email back saying, no, I haven't given up on it. I've been doing A, B, and C. Like, what have you been doing? Blah, 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 blah. It doesn't matter what really the response is. What matters is that you've took a step further into opening up the deal a little bit, into opening up the lines of communication. From there, you can actually look to start building rapport and then look to start establishing the terms on what you want to agree on. So another great lesson out of this book is you want the person to name their price first. And if they name their price first, it gives you basically more leverage. So for instance, a real world practical example of this is if you're on the phone to a recruiter, you're job hunting, you're trying to get some sort of new career, and the recruiter says to you, so what are your salary expectations? And you tell them exactly what your salary expectations are. What happens then is the job they had lined up for you magically just pays the salary expectations that you were actually looking for, right? Even though that might actually be quite a low salary for that job, right? And the reason why is you've lost all forms of leverage. You've told them what your goal is there. So a real world practical example of this would be to say, so this is my position. What do you think the kind of range is for this position that I'm looking for? get them to name the number first, and then you can go a little bit higher from there, because you don't want to just say something when it might be way lower than what they can actually find for you. And the final big lesson I picked up from this book is how to learn how to spot a liar. So in real life, in business, whatever you're in, you don't really want to surround yourself with people who might not have your best interests at heart, people who are maybe Machiavellian, people who are liars as well. And a great way to do this is to spot the liar, see who's the person who's frequently lying. And Chris was saying in this book, a counterintuitive approach to actually finding the liar is finding the person who paints a scenario in the most amount of detail. See, when people recite events or tell you something they're remembering, they have the tendency to tell you just the basic bits which have come into their brain. They don't overemphasize the situation. They don't tell you all of the detail about the situation. But what happens is liars have a tendency to do this. And the reason why is they rehearse a situation in their head and they think to themselves, I better make it believable. So they almost overdo it on the details. It's a simple little technique, but it's definitely something I'll use going forward because it's so counterintuitive. If you think about the psychology there, liars are trying to use the prevention is better than cure, and they're trying to prevent you asking any questions by making a scenario super detailed, way too detailed. And he said it's one of the key ways to actually find out if a person is lying. So I've probably not done this book justice. And honestly, there's so many different gems in here with so many like compelling stories. I highly recommend that you just pick it up yourself. I've told you what's worked for me and what I'm going to use going forward, but I'm sure there's other gems in here which will actually help you. Hope you guys enjoyed this. See you in the next one.